Hey everyone, I'm your host, Emily Lauren. Welcome to the Body Positive Podcast, where we ditch diets, normalize real bodies, and help you feel better in your own skin. Welcome everyone to the Body Positive Podcast Show. Today we are welcoming Cassie Willnauer to the show to speak about the effect that weight stigma has on sexuality. Cassie is a licensed professional counselor and a clinical sexology student who is working towards her PhD. First of all, that's amazing. And secondly, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So what made you want to start studying sexology in the first place?
I've always been a kid, like from being a kid, I always was like fascinated by sex and sexuality. Like my mom loves to tell the story that when she was like trying to like start broaching the topic of sex that, and I was like 8 or 9. And
yeah.
I was like, she's like, what do you want to know? And I was like, tell me everything.
I love that.
And she's like, I don't think I'm going to tell you everything.
But it's good to know that stuff, right?
Yeah. So some of it is just kind of who I am. And then some of it is, some of it is just, I have found people to be in a tremendous amount of pain around sex. And so that's, issues with sex and sexuality. And so that's been a place where I'm like, that's something that needs, like, people need that. They need to be able to go to a place where they can feel comfortable talking about that. And then I personally went to a therapist, and I was having an issue around sex at the time. And I broached the topic, and they were very uncomfortable talking about it, and basically were like, you just need to go see a doctor. And I was like,
what?
I was like, I went.
Thanks.
I went to the doctor.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong. Like, there's nothing actually, like, there's nothing physically wrong. I'm here to talk to you about this because I know it's in my head.
Yeah, and taking away that shame in talking about those things too. So I think that's incredible. So tell me a little bit about your own personal experience with your body image, first of all, because obviously we're going to talk about body image and sexuality.
Oh, God, this is so rough. So I knew from 7 that I was not a skinny kid. I put that in air quotes. Because, you see the kids around you, and then I had a family member that was charming enough to point it out to me.
Always the case.
Yeah, an adult family member, so that was lovely. And that was really difficult. And really from that point, I was just like, oh my God, this is a thing. And then part of my story is that growing up, my mom's always been fat. And it's always been something that she has been so at odds with and so just upset about and bothered by and just fighting so hard against. And so I saw that, and I got very clearly the message that you don't want this for yourself. Do anything you can to run in the opposite direction of this kind of body. And so from a young age, that's sort of how it started, and kind of snowballed from there. And really, I've never been a person that had like I don't know, like the ideal body. Like I've never had whatever as that shifts throughout time, I've never had whatever it was.
Yes. So. Yeah. I don't think anyone does, but
I don't think anyone does except
that spectrum. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think anyone does except maybe the people who are like responsible for creating some of that messaging. Maybe,
yes.
I think there are certain celebrities and stuff we could point to as like
definitely
that's where that idea came from.
So is there anything that helped improve the way you feel about your body today?
You know what? Several different things. I think over the last 2.5 years, it's been a really big progression for me. That's probably the period where I've had the most change in how I see myself. I had my son in January of 2019, and pregnancy was very hard for me, just like physically and mentally.
Yes.
So he's my second kid, and it was just so difficult because prior to getting pregnant, I don't know how to explain where I was. I was in this place of, I really think at that point I was very entrenched in diet culture, to be honest.
Yes. Yeah.
I had glimpses of understanding what like health at every size meant at that point, but I was like, I kind of was kidding myself that I was doing intuitive eating and I wasn't. And I was in real, like, I hate this word, but like I was in really good shape. Like, and that's not a good way to say what I mean, but like I was really, really physically fit. Like I could run all around, and we had this mini trampoline that we'd gotten for our daughter for Christmas. And I was just constantly jumping on that thing for fun, not because it was like, oh, I need to get my steps in or anything like, and so going through pregnancy was really hard for a number of reasons, but one of those was that like I had no energy at all, and I just missed the level of energy that I had once had. And then when I had him, I gave birth without any pain medication, and that is not something that anybody has to do, and so that's not why I bring it up, but it was a really empowering experience for me personally. That meant a lot, and it was what I had wanted to do, and it was just, I tell people this and they think I'm insane, but I am a person who never wants to be pregnant again, but I loved giving birth. I would absolutely give birth again. I loved it. It was the coolest thing. Now, recovering from that is garbage. But giving birth was incredible, and I would absolutely do that again if I could skip the pregnant part.
Right? Oh,
I also don't want to take another baby home, so someone else can have that too.
Someone else can have that baby, yeah.
But yeah, so that experience I think really shifted things for me, and from that point, I just stopped. I just didn't do any of the dieting stuff anymore. I was like, you know what? I really trusted my body at this really powerful and scary, to be honest. Like, giving birth is scary. And I don't say that to scare people who are pregnant or thinking about becoming pregnant, but like there's something about it that's scary, and things happen during it that you're like, is this normal? Am I okay?
Unknown, and the lack of control that you have with the situation.
Yes. So for me, I think it was just so cool to be like, hey, when you let go, your body actually does its own thing and it's fine. And that was so cool to experience.
It's funny how you say too, like when you hated being pregnant, I was the exact same way. And I think like a lot of us think that it's because, we're not in the same body or as thin as we used to be. But I feel like a big part of that is just not feeling like yourself. And it's so easy to dip back into that diet culture because you're so desperate to feel like yourself again. I mean, even with me, who has been intuitive eating for years, when I had my kids, it was like, okay, I kind of went back into that mentality to try and get back to myself. And it became more about weight loss than actually, about just feeling like myself in my body again. Right. But having kids can be so empowering as well at the same time. And I felt this comfort level in myself that really changed. And I think, you can get to a good place after those experiences. But like you said, we don't talk enough about like the recovery and what we need to do.
And the rhetoric around it just culturally is like, we have to get your body back and whatever that means. And I think sometimes, especially when you're in a state of a lack of sleep and you have a new human you're trying to learn and understand and love, and you have, your body is in pain a lot and you have different things going on. Like sometimes you can't poop when you need to. Like things are happening. Things are happening. Big things. And so it's sort of like it's almost just how we're like socialized as women in our culture as well. Is like, well, the thing you do is to feel like you. It can be a part of your identity to like take care of yourself. And what we usually mean by that is diet. And yeah. So I really urge people to like, just avoid that. And if you feel that in you, there's nothing wrong with you. It's part of our culture, but you can reject it.
Yes, absolutely. So switching gears a little bit, talk to me about weight stigma and the effect it has on our sexuality.
So it has really big effects. In fact, I just saw a post on Instagram yesterday from someone that I follow, who describes themselves as a super fat person. And they are a trans person, and they talked about how being denied, the surgery that would make them feel much more comfortable in their body. You know, they are a person who, from what they had said, obviously this can change over time, but they had said, you know, it's not that, you know, I'm not suicidal over this. I don't have so much like dysphoria around my body that I'm in danger of harming myself, but it's something that I've had to navigate, like just being told no, like I don't get to have this surgery. And for some people, it could be a life-saving surgery. And that's hard. That's a really hard one. Yeah. So that's one big way, but it's little ways. And I know I always try to make sure that I'm not focusing on the like small fat to mid-fat people, because those people do experience that stigma, but like the most harmed people are the people who are, you know, a size 26 and above, right? Or a size 24 Agreed. And above.
Yes. Yeah.
So you know, those people are often told that we can't put you under anesthesia to have your knee replacement or to have your trans, you know, affirming surgeries. But we'd really like to give you some bariatric surgery if you do that first. And I'm sorry, that's not good medicine. Which is more
threatening, is it not? Yeah.
That's just not good medicine. Like it's unethical. You are saying we can't put you under for this, but we will put you under to make your body more acceptable to look at.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a huge issue. And you know, how are fat people treated differently when it comes to sex? You know, like I think a lot of us think of fetishes, you know, when we think about fat people and sex instead of just normal humans. You know, why do we have this idea that they are treated differently when it comes to their sexuality?
I just think it goes back to like our culture, and I don't think that there's any particular thing we can point to. You are either a fetish or you are completely without sexuality altogether, is sort of like how it's viewed. But like fat people have sex, they enjoy sex. And a part of it I think is that, and this is like maybe going to be slightly graphic, but like
all good. I like it.
But like what I really think is that we center conversations and thoughts and ideas about sex and our culture around penises. And because and we idealize penetrative sex as like the pinnacle. And when we do that, and then we see a very fat person, someone who would be in like the super fat or infinifat category, we start thinking, well, how does that work? Yes. And that's, one, it's really fucked up because my God, is that none of your business? But two, that's not the pinnacle of sex. Like being able to have penetrative, being able to have penetrative sex isn't the only way to quote have sex. Like sex can be so many different things. So I sort of look at the weight stigma and fat phobia as that intersects with sexuality as sort of just like a sprawling out of like general just like patriarchy and like all the things.
There's a little more to it, right? So a lot of women struggle with having fulfilling sex lives, period. In your professional opinion, why is this?
There's a couple of big reasons. In my experiences with working with clients, it comes from a couple of different places. One is absolutely body image, and the research backs that up as well. That if you are worried about your body and you have a lot of like body checking habits and you are kind of monitoring your body a lot, like it's hard to get in the mindset for sex. It's also really hard to be in the moment during sex. And it's hard to have an orgasm if you are not able to let go. So
or if you feel like you're on display. I think like a lot of my girlfriends have talked about that, like it's like you're watching yourself sometimes when because you're not enjoying the act, you're thinking about how you look to your partner, and you know, is my stomach sucked in, do I look okay, you know, am I taking too long, etc., etc.
So that's not a good context to have an orgasm. You're just shooting yourself in the foot with all that. So body image is a really big one. But there are other pieces of it too. Like there's huge like purity messaging in our culture. And I see a lot of people who have been really affected by that. And I think that trickles down, like, certainly in my office, I will get clients who are like, I was raised very strictly religious. I was not allowed to have sex or touch my own body in a sexual way. It was considered a sin. I was very worried about that and very afraid of my own body for a very long time. And now I feel like I can't trust it. And I don't know how to flip the switch now that I'm married. So we have that. But that also has trickle-down effects. The trickle-down effects of that are that women, like, we have the idea in our culture that women's pleasure is not important. There are literally people who genuinely believe that women cannot and do not have orgasms. That is not true. It's just not true. We do.
So I saw something on Instagram the other day, and it was a post about how women have the hardest time reaching orgasm with a male partner as opposed to either a female partner or during masturbation. Like, yes, that plays into it because, you know, we feel like we have this pressure to perform. There's this shame attached with our own sexuality and being able to embrace it because we feel like we're there for male pleasure a lot of the time. That's
it. Exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say. It's because we're focusing on that damn penis again. Let's just let it go.
Yeah.
Like, just let it go. And honestly, I also see men who really struggle with this because, and that's why I get so annoyed when people are like, oh my God, feminism, who cares? And I'm like, it helps you too, you dumbass. Like,
yeah.
So I'm like, no, because I get so many men who are struggling with either ED or like premature ejaculation. So either like erectile dysfunction stuff or... And often when they end up in the therapy room for those things, it's because they've already gone to their doctor and potentially seen a specialist like a urologist for these things.
Yes.
So it's not a physical thing. It is something that's going on within them.
Mental, yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So, you know how you were saying that there are more to sex than penetrative sex. Tell me about, I'm sure our listeners are probably like, what other kinds of sex is there? So talk to me a little bit about what we should be telling our partners, you know, that it's not all about the penis sex.
Yeah. So I think a good way to frame this whole, like the answer to this question is like, stop calling foreplay.
Yes.
All of that is sex, and what even can also be a part of the sex is like when you do the things for your partner that help them be able to be in the mindset to let go. So if they're struggling, if they're going, I absolutely know that I will not be able to relax if I know that we didn't do the dishes after dinner.
Yes.
But they're tired or they don't want to or whatever. Like they're not like they don't have the capacity for it because it took longer to get a kid to bed or whatever. Go do the dishes for them. Not because you're hoping that will be a transaction to get you sex, but because that is a part of the sex. That is a part of doing a thing that will make your partner happy.
Yeah. I like that. I always tell my husband that like acts of service to me is like the biggest turn on.
Yeah. You're like, you know what's
true,
hot
though.
when you vacuum.
You are thinking about me and you are doing things for me. That makes me like you more. That makes me feel more connected to him. And I totally like that. I think that's awesome.
And the thing is, that's not true for everyone. So I certainly don't want to give the impression that like all women need the dishes done before they can have sex. But if you know for you in particular that is a thing that you need, please give yourself the appropriate context. Just like I would tell you, if it's too hot in your bedroom and y'all are sweating on each other and it just grosses you out, you need to figure that out. Maybe we have some fans. Maybe we turn the air down during sexy time. It's worth the electric bill.
I love that. And the other thing I was thinking of when you were just talking there is how we should take away the word foreplay. A lot of women, at least a lot of the women in my life that I talk to about sex, they orgasm during what is normally called foreplay instead of the actual penetrative sex. How many women actually orgasm from penetrative sex?
From penetrative sex without clitoral stimulation, it's anywhere from 25 to 30% of women.
Yeah, so it's very low.
Very, very low. And I get so many people who are like, oh my God, I think there's something wrong with me. And I'm like, do you know about the clitoris?
Yes, just saying.
Yeah. And for some people they do, and it's they haven't figured out what works, and some of that has a lot of emotional stuff around it, and we can unpack that during sessions. And for other people, they're like, tell me more.
Yeah.
And the thing of it is, like, the clitoris, we know so much more, and it's been so recent. I think it was 1996 or 1997 that we even, like, fully mapped the whole clitoris, that it's more than just the little bean. And some people, the way that those things line up inside of their body gets excellent stimulation from penetration, and they would be in that 25 to 30%. But most women do not.
Yeah. And I think the other thing, too, with men is there's very limited sex education for them. I mean, most of the guys are looking to pornography to sort of, you know, which is very performative sex, to find out how to please a woman. And, like, what can we do? What can we do if, you know, we need our men to learn some techniques without saying, like, hey...
So the best thing you can do if you had sex or you've been having sex with the same partner for a while and it's not going well, because I can tell you might have amazing sex in your 30s, and then when you get to your 50s, you need something totally different. So this can happen in the same relationship, over time. You have to be able to have those conversations, but don't criticize them directly after. Like,
good
and
advice.
I know, and I'm not saying, like, I understand that when you're trying to have these conversations, you're not trying to come at it, like, critically, but it feels a lot more like criticism if it's right after. So talk about sex outside of the bedroom is really a big piece of it.
That's some good advice.
Yeah.
The other thing I'm wondering is how many of your clients actually expect their partner to be perfect looking? Is, like, women have this expectation that our men want us to look like porn stars, or they want us to act a certain way. You know, do men have these unrealistic expectations of their partners, or is it mostly women having these expectations of themselves?
I think it's an expectation that women have of themselves. I mean, I can't speak for all men, certainly, but I think that it comes so much more from our own, like, we're so much harder on ourselves, and I think that goes for men as well. I mean, my husband can be so hard on himself, and I'm like, I love everything about your body.
Yeah.
Like, and it's not in any way what would be considered, you know, perfect in air quotes, you know, but I love it. I think it's great. And I can, the thing I really like to tell women is, like, think of every person that you have ever had a fleeting thought about, God, sex with them would be good, or, oh, they're hot.
Yes.
Do they all look exactly the same?
True.
No, they don't. Like, I can be wildly attracted to Hugh Jackman and also be like, Pink, yes, I would do that. And they look nothing alike and don't have the same parts as far as we know. Like, and both of them could definitely get the job done, at least I think. Right? So
absolutely. And
I just broaden it.
Sorry,
like, no, I just keep thinking for people, they need to just broaden their, like, recognize that, like, all of this stuff is kind of in your own head, but it's not in theirs, so don't put it there. Absolutely.
And I think, like, sometimes we also don't give men credit for the fact that there are other things, other factors aside from appearance, even though we're both taught that, you know, both men and women, that's what we should be interested in, right? You know, like, men can also want to have, you know, those emotional connections, and that could be a turn on for sex and things like that as well. But that's not how diet culture works, right? That's how they get us, by telling us we need to be thin to be sexually appealing. Yep. So tell me how you feel about pornography.
I am, like, really pro porn, to be honest. Like, I think that we need to be critical about the porn that we're watching. I think that we need to really
make sure it's ethical, those type of things.
Yeah, like, make sure the porn that you're looking at is ethical. And also, like, I have a very different perspective on it than I think our culture maybe, like, pushes us to have. And I really think, like, when it's sort of that, I think of it similarly to the way that I think about food, in that it's one of those things where when you tell yourself you're not allowed to have sugar, it's the only thing you can think about.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And when you tell yourself you're not allowed to look at porn or you are bad for looking at porn, all you want to do is look at porn.
Yeah.
So I just think, and not everybody, but there are a lot of people who have that experience, and then they come to therapists and they are like, I am addicted to porn. And I'm like, gee, how are you measuring that? Because there is no measurement for a porn addiction. It does not exist. It's basically the level of distress that you have over porn, and has nothing to do with the amount of porn you're watching or the way that it's actually interfering in your life.
Yes.
So I really don't operate from a model of addiction when it comes to porn or sex at all. And I really just think it can be a fun thing to incorporate into your partnered sex life. It can be a fun way for you to explore different things that turn you on. It can be, you get to learn things about your sexuality when you choose to become more free with things like that.
Yes.
So yeah, I'm here for it. And
yeah. And I think too, you know, I think the only problem I have is how fetishized some of it is, but there's so much more resources out there now. I've been reading a lot about like feminist porn, which is basically ethical porn. And it's made legally, consensually, respectfully of the performers.
Yeah.
When it's not so fetishized, you know?
Well, and when I think about the fetishize, like if you have a fetish that you're really into, and say that is like fat, like say it is like BBW porn, right? Like, okay, let's find that like through OnlyFans. Let's find that like through a platform that allows you as the fat person to choose what you show, how much you show, when you show it, and how much you charge for it.
That is a really important point.
Because like if you and again, I know that there are ethical porn production companies, and if that's more what you're looking for, that's fine too. But like, please, when you are specifically looking at something that could potentially be dehumanizing someone, we need to make sure that that's ethical. I don't have a problem with you being into it.
Yeah,
there are tons of things
or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. I get why like people are allowed to have their sexual fantasies, and they don't have to make explanations for that as long as it's not harming someone else. But that means we need to be thinking critically about whether or not the porn that we're engaging with is potentially harming someone else.
Absolutely. And I think that's really important to think about. Where do our fantasies come from? Like, how do they develop?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know that we have a ton of research on that.
I'm just thinking about it because you're talking about fantasies and stuff, like, and exploring, but like, where do these things come from? You know, if there's a certain genre that you can be attracted to. I'm sure it's a loaded question because I'm sure there's several things that factor into it.
Sure, I'm sure there are. I also tread really lightly because I think something that people try to rationalize when they're feeling a lot of shame around something that they're interested in sexually, or a fantasy that they have. There's a lot of shame, and then I don't want to like pathologize that as well. Like, you're into BBW porn because your mom was really abusive and she was fat, and like, I don't want to do all that. It's not, one, that's not very helpful to the client, and two, I don't know that it's accurate or that we could actually say that definitively. So really, I think what I really love for people is to just like have some radical acceptance around your whatever your fantasies are, and recognize that like you might say or do some really out there shit when you are in the moment and you are feeling it, and then you go back to like your buttoned up 9 to 5, like, and you're still like, you get to be both of those people.
And I think a lot of people don't have that permission or don't feel like they have that permission to be. And I always like to say, like, you're never going to be all the types of your personality at once, you know? Like, we are so diverse, and, you know, there's so many layers to who we are as people that we don't have to be everything all at once. We can be different parts of ourselves at different times. What would you say to someone who has a certain fantasy, but also, you know, enjoys watching it pornography-wise, but wouldn't actually want, like, for example, a threesome, right? Say you enjoy watching threesome pornography, and I think a lot of our partners, you know, we worry like, oh, is that what they really want? If we see them, you know, see their interest in something, but then like, how do you figure out, you know, what's real, what's a fantasy, what's, you know?
So if we're speaking to women that are having that fear, I think it's important to point out that the most commonly reported fantasy that women have is a rape fantasy. And I don't know a single woman who has ever wanted that to happen to them.
Yes. I love that.
So we get to live in both places. We get to live in a place where we fantasize about something that makes us completely squeamish to think about once we're not in sexy mode.
Yes.
Once we're not turned on anymore, that may never cross our mind as something that we would, you know, think about on the regular. But when you're in that zone, it might be something that comes up. So if your partner is looking at something, it doesn't, one, they might want it in real life or they might not. Two, they're not necessarily asking you to participate. It sounds like you walked in and found out, or you went through their phone and found out. So they have not asked you to participate. They might, and you are always allowed to say no. And it doesn't have to be you being hateful or mean about it. You can just be like, oh yeah, I don't think that's my thing.
Yeah.
I don't think that's my thing. I'm not into that. Or I'm not into this particular aspect of that, but we could do X, Y, and Z instead. Or whatever that needs to look like.
I think that's really important to note. And like, I'm thinking about like the early stages of my relationship with my husband. I remember like if I saw a picture of another girl, I would feel insecure about my body. It wasn't that I minded the pornography. It was more about like, is he comparing me to that? And I think a lot of women who struggle with body image issues, that's what they're thinking, rather than this is a fantasy, this is something that turns them on. They're allowed to have time to themselves, you know. We're all allowed to explore our bodies in our own time. And now I could care less if I ever came across something like that, you know. But I think that
and the thing of it is, like, do you need to look? You know what I mean? Like, if it's giving you, if you don't on its face have an issue with your partner looking at porn, then the issue is really internal. Like, do you actually need to look? Like, and you can create that boundary for yourself. Like, my husband can hand me his phone so that I can use it because mine's dead or whatever, and I don't need to go through his pictures, his texts, his apps. Like, I just needed it to make a call. We're good. Yeah. Like, don't look.
Yeah. I agree. And
I don't need to know his browser history.
Like, yes. And I think that, like, we're taught that we're not allowed to have, you know, privacy in our own relationships sometimes. Like, I think some people think, like, oh, I have to share with my partner everything. You don't have to tell them about your fantasies, right? You can if you want to involve them, but like you were saying before, if you don't want to, you don't, it's your business, right?
This is such a good point, because like this is something I talk about when I work with couples. So if a couple comes in, like during that first session, I tell them like that I will, usually when I work with couples, I'll see them together and I'll see them each individually, and then I'll bring them back together just to make sure that we all have the same goals. We can talk about each individual's history, like their sexual history, relationship history. And sometimes they've never had those conversations with each other. And sometimes it's just awkward to have that conversation with a stranger with your partner sitting right next to you.
True.
But the spiel that I always give them in that first session is there is a difference between privacy and secrecy. And you are entitled to privacy. And the difference can be really simple. It's whether or not it actually impacts whether or not the thing that you are holding to yourself directly impacts your partner. So if you are, if you are in a monogamous relationship and you are having sex with someone else, that could definitely potentially directly impact your partner. One, because you have a contract between the two of you that you would not be doing that. And two, because you could be impacting their own health without their knowledge. But if you like pick your nose and wipe your boogers on the back of the couch, like, dude, you don't have to tell your partner that. Live your best life. Put those boogers wherever you want. Like, just...
I
Yeah.
love that. I
That
love that.
that's and privacy can be like we could go on forever about the problematic nature of asking your partner how many previous partners they've had, but to me that's privacy as well. Like that's
Yeah.
not giving you the information you think it is. Like
Yeah.
that if you want to know whether or not they are healthy, you can ask if they've had an STI panel recently and what those
Hmm.
results are. If you want to know I, there's a lot of different, like I just think what you're asking when you ask that question is pretty loaded, and it's not giving you more than it is like hurting.
Yes, yeah. And I think like at least with a lot of women, we want that information because of this desire to compare ourselves with every other female out there. Like we were so I remember when I first started dating my husband, like I was curious about his past history and stuff like that. And that was something we both agreed to talk about. Um but it was like, in the beginning when I was more insecure with myself, it was like, well, what did she look like? Were her boobs as big as mine? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and I, like you said, like those are things that shouldn't be important in a relationship, and they're entitled
Yeah.
to not have to talk about those things. And you're almost asking your partner in that respect to compare you to previous people, which is not something we
Well,
should have to do ever.
you're like asking them to collude with your own self-hatred,
Yes,
and that's
yeah.
not what they want to do. Like
No,
they don't want to do
they're
that. They
interested in
love you.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. So, even in healthy relationships, people masturbate, and there can be a lot of guilt around that. Why is it okay to masturbate even when you're in a relationship?
It goes back to privacy versus secrecy.
Yeah.
You're you are allowed to have your own individual sexuality that you don't necessarily share with anyone else. And if
Hmm.
you are the person who walked in on the partner watching the porn that has the fantasy that you are super not into,
Hmm.
where else are they going to indulge that?
Absolutely.
If you're
I
in a
agree.
monogamous relationship, they're going to indulge that with themselves.
Hmm.
And you didn't when you guys got married, you didn't like sign over the rights to your genitals to one another. Like you keep that. That's yours, and you choose to share it with your partner.
Absolutely. Why is it so hard for people to talk about sex, whether it's within a relationship or just in general?
So within a relationship specifically, it can be really difficult to talk about sex because usually when people first get in relationships, at least in our culture, they're having good sex and they're having a lot of it.
Hmm.
And then that tapers off, and maybe one person is distressed and the other person isn't distressed, and they've talked about it and it's caused problems, so now we just don't talk about it. Or they're just kind of tiptoeing around each other like, is this okay? Are we both cool with only having sex once or twice a week? Are we good? So that's part of it. And then in long-term relationships, sometimes people realize like, oh, I'm not really fulfilled sexually because they hadn't explored enough to know exactly what they wanted, and now that they're 20
Hmm.
years into a relationship, they know what they want, but they're also like in extra in oh god, I can't say that word today, sorry, my brain is just fried, but they're like linked to each other. They're linked to each other
Yes.
in a way that feels like they cannot break it, and so they
Hmm.
feel like if I talk about this big thing, like a fetish I've had for my whole life or something that I want to try forever, or if I ask my wife for anal, she's going to leave me, right? Like
Yeah.
there's this thing where they're like, oh my god, like I can't blow this thing up, so I'm gonna never talk about it and
Yeah.
be miserable. And I'm just like, oh no, guys, like let's talk about it.
So how can people get started talking about it better?
um there's so many resources right now. I think there's like a million different ways. Like you can be like, hey, I read this blog post, or you can be like, hey, I saw this TikTok video, or you can be like, I follow this person on Instagram and I have got to tell you this crazy thing they posted and see what you think about it because it kind of made sense, or
Uh-huh.
whatever. Yeah, like you start
Those are good
there.
suggestions. I like that.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. So tell us how people can learn more about your services and where we can find you online.
So I practice in the Kansas City area. I'm licensed on the Kansas side and should be getting my Missouri license here soon. I do virtual and in person. So if you're in the area, you can find me. My website is just CassieWillnauer.com, first and last name. And then if you want to like just engage with me more broadly, I'm on TikTok and Instagram. Instagram is like the best way to get like more like kind of back and forth, because I'll do like polls on my stories and ask questions and engage that way. So
Love
my
it.
Instagram is at Cassie Willnauer LPC.
Perfect.
So yeah, so people can find me there, and I have a lot of fun on there. And
Amazing.
I think people are enjoying that. It's going well. So
Yeah, absolutely. And lastly, if you could offer one tip to our listeners, what would that be?
The one tip would be I don't know if it's a tip so much as like a little insight, maybe.
Yeah.
I want to encourage people to view sex as play, as the way that we play as adults.
I like
Because
that.
think about the last time, like for me personally, it makes me really cranky to have to sit down and play pretend with my kids. I suck at playing pretend. I suck at it. It's terrible. But I can let go when it comes to sex. That has enough of a payoff. It's worth it. And I want people to view it that way, because I think we have so many strict ideas about what sex is, and it's this or it's that, and the reality is, you know what? Like, sex doesn't have to be any one particular thing. It can start with doing the dishes. It can start when you get naked. It doesn't matter where it starts so much as like allowing it to be fun. Let's just have fun.
That's great advice. And it was such a pleasure to speak with you today. I really appreciate you coming on and giving some of us your expertise. So thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Thanks for having me.
Once again, thanks for listening to today's episode. Make sure you follow us at Real Happy Daughter, and please share this with someone who needs a little more real in their life.